Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with The View from the Pew. Today I want to talk to you about speaking up. Okay, and I want to do that for a particular reason because I've noticed something in our culture, in our society that I don't think is healthy or helpful to us just in general. Okay, I don't care what side of the political fence or which position you hold on various moral issues. I do hold particular moral values and I make no secret about that, and there's tons of videos out there of me sharing those, okay? However, what I want to speak about today is how we communicate with each other and why it's important to say something, especially to say something if that view is not popular, okay? And here's why. I have noticed that in this time, perhaps more than others, but maybe not, we have a tendency to, in response to someone sharing a particular idea about an economic issue or a moral issue or about a political issue, instead of engaging in dialogue about that particular issue, what we do is we attack and we label. So someone may make some statement about Black Lives Matter and how they disagree with some course of action that group took. And instead of saying, yeah, maybe that wasn't the best approach, or let's talk about this and figure out how things could have been done better, immediately that individual is labeled a racist, and therefore they're no good, they're not worth listening to. And I'm like, whoa, hold on. I don't think they said anything racist, which, by the way, is defined as holding the idea that one race is superior to others. Okay, and if you hold that view, and I don't care what color your skin is or what your cultural background is, if you hold that view, you're a racist. All right, and so that's a bit of an aside, but I want to address that very briefly to say that you can't say that only one race, namely white people, can be racist. Anyone who thinks their race is superior to other races is a racist. Okay, that's the deal. Now, moving back to what I want to talk about, which is our tendency, or the tendency of some people, to just label and then attack. So once we've labeled someone as a homophobe or an Islamophobe or a fascist or whatever else, okay, then because they're this bad thing, right? Because they're not a human being with ideas anymore, now they're just a bad thing, a racist or an Islamophobe or whatever else. We can just train all barrels on them and go at it, just attack. Okay, now what we call that, or one way to describe that, is using the threat of force and intimidation to get people to say and do what you want. Okay, so you're not allowed to say and do certain things. If you do, we're going to attack you. Well, there's a label for that, and the label is bullying. All right, and the only way to deal with bullying is to stand up for yourself and say, forget it, yeah, attack me, see what happens, right? When I was a kid growing up, my dad often shared this with me. He said, look, when you're dealing with a bully, and you will find them, you've got to stand up for yourself. Okay, you've got to say, forget it, pal, this ain't happening. Because people who are able to use fear and intimidation to get their own way will continue to do that until it stops working. So you've got to be the one that says, hey, this isn't working anymore. All right, now, within that context, here's what I'm encouraging you to do, and that is open your mouth, okay? I'm going to share a couple of reasons why this is true from a scriptural, from a Christian perspective. I want to share a little bit about what changes you might be able to make and how you can improve things by doing this. And then I want to talk a little bit about how to go about it, okay? So first off, you need to understand that there is a message, a body of truth that people need to know about. They need to know about it for their physical earthly lives and for the benefit of those, and for the benefit of their spiritual and eternal lives, right? Remember in Acts chapter 11 and verse 14 when Cornelius was told to send for Peter, and he was told to send for Peter because Peter would bring a message by which you and your household would be saved. That is, there's a body of truth here that could have a huge impact on your life, Cornelius. And that's the same principle is still true. Okay, people need to know truths that are helpful to them. Even though some of those truths are deemed, politically incorrect, or you may be labeled with one of those labels I was talking about before for sharing them, it doesn't matter, okay? I'm willing to wear that label, even if it's wrong, in order to share something that is important enough that it could help someone, okay? And so the next thing is, 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15 says, hey, always be ready to give a reason for the hope that is within you. So you live and act and believe a different way than the people around you. Why is that? Right? Be able to say, here's why. This is why I think this. This is why I believe this. All right. And if you care about people, you will, even if it makes you unpopular for a certain amount of time. Okay. As a parent, I regularly have to share things, tell things to my children that I know they're not going to like. No, you can't play with that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't go there. Yes, you have to go to bed at a certain time. Yes, you have to wake up and go to school at a certain time, right? They don't like to hear any of that stuff. And they'll even say, oh, you don't like me and I'm mad at you, blah, blah, and go, that's fine, right? Be mad at me. It doesn't change the fact that this is happening, right? And so we sometimes need to share things because we care about people, right? We live in a society that is racing as quickly as it can toward being a secular society that is no influence from God and religion. Guess what? That's not helpful. That's harmful. And so any chance I get, I'm going to fight back against that. I'm going to say, whoa, whoa, whoa. You don't want to go down this road. Okay, I made a video a while back about the cardinal in Toronto who made the statement, look, people don't realize the implications of the choices that they're making, the laws they're passing. Well, in some cases they do, but he's kind of right. People don't always realize that there are implications to the direction in which they want to go. And saying to them, hold on, maybe you should think about this for a second. It's going to be, you're not going to be well liked, okay? And some people are going to get upset with you. Recently, I was discussing an idea with a group of friends, and someone said, hey, you could never say that in a public school setting. And I'm there going, yeah, but that's probably a good reason for someone to say it, because it needs to be heard, okay? I talked about human sexuality not that long ago, and the point was raised that the natural consequences of sexual behavior is childbearing. Okay, now that's something we're not supposed to say. Sex is purely about pleasure and gratification. It's not about bearing children, and it's not about being responsible. And so people, in sex ed curriculums, you don't even hear that. Well, the reality is, if you came over to my house and I was planting carrots, right, you may say, hey, what are you doing? I say, oh, planting carrots. And you say, do you like carrots? No, I don't like carrots at all. Well, why would you do that then? Well, I don't know. I just enjoy the planting the seeds. Well, right, think about this. Okay, the natural consequence of your behavior is this. So if you don't want that natural consequence, then don't engage in the behavior, okay? Pretty simple stuff, but we're not allowed to say it. And frankly, someone needs to. And so there are times when we've got to speak up. Not that long ago, I was at the farmer's market, and some of you may know this story, but there was a guy walking through the farmer's market, and he was one of the most critical people that I've ever seen. And he was wearing a shirt, and probably others who are sort of his persuasion would wish he wouldn't, but he was wearing a shirt that said something along the lines of, eventually humanity's last great problem will be solved, and the problem was religion, right? That's what it said on the front of his shirt. But he's walking through the farmer's market, and I remember he picked up a piece of cheese, and he's like, how could anyone sell this? This is the most disgusting thing. And then he looked at some knitting, and he starts looking at the stitching. He goes, this is a mess. And he throws it down on the table of this vendor who was selling it. And he just went through a number of booths and just totally crapped all over whatever they were selling. And it was horrible. But he came to my booth, and of course I've got this Church of Christ thing, and I've got a bunch of religious sort of paraphernalia out in front. And I said, how's it going? He said, what are you doing here? And I said, well, what does it look like I'm doing here? He's like, yeah, this religion stuff, total waste of time. And I said, oh, really? So why is that? And so I began to discuss with him. And I was more challenging in that discussion than maybe I would be with another person who held similar views. But because he was so brash and so aggressive in his nature, you sort of have to come back with a little bit of assertiveness. And so we ended up having a very good conversation. But I've got to say, as I was sitting here watching him come through, I thought to myself, we should not allow this guy to bully others like this. And so someone's got to say something, right? And the interesting thing is, he wasn't, when I talked to him, and I was about as forthright with him as he was with me, he didn't, he actually responded better to that, right? Because otherwise he would have just thought, yeah, another pushover that I can dominate. And you wouldn't have been able to have that dialogue, all right? So, say something, all right? When someone brings up a bad moral choice, right? I know it's tempting to keep your mouth shut and kind of look at the floor, but say, hold on, I'm not sure if that's a great idea. Okay? When someone brings up an activity that is going to be harmful to them, don't just say, yeah, I guess if you want to hurt, say, whoa, think about this for a second. Right? When someone brings up a political view that is unpopular, right now, it's really, really popular and really fun to just hate Donald Trump. Okay? And I'm not a huge fan of every single thing that Donald Trump has ever said or done. Never watched his show, so I can't say anything about that. But I am likely to say, if someone, and this is again, people will call him Hitler, and they'll do, and I'll go, wait a second, I'm not so sure if you're taking, I'm not so sure if you're making a meaningful contribution to a discussion about politics here, or if you're just kind of being an idiot, right? If you want to say, here's Trump's policy and this is why it's wrong, I've got all the time in the world for that kind of a discussion. But if you want to just label him as something and be done with it, yeah, I'm going to say, wait a second, maybe you should think about that. Okay? And the same is going to be true about all kinds of social issues: homosexuality, abortion, sexuality, right? Promiscuity. Okay, these are things that are immoral behaviors, and they're going to have consequences, ramifications in people's lives. And so I'm not going to pretend like I'm okay with that. And I don't think you should either. Okay? And I'm not saying we ought to be mean. And this is where I want to get to, where we think about how we engage in this discussion. Okay? Over in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 15, it says, sharing the truth in love. In 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 25, Timothy's told to correct his opponents with gentleness. In 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 16, right after verse 15, which said be ready to give an answer, verse 16 says do it with gentleness and respect. Okay, so I think there's a way to talk to people that's going to be helpful and meaningful. We can't have two people just descend into name calling, right? We need to have one person at least that says, okay, hold on, but let's think about this for a second, because I'm not sure if we've fully thought this through. And so here's some ways that you can do that. You could ask a question. Right? I recently heard a great story about this, in which a person sat on a plane right beside someone who was of the belief that they had the miraculous power of healing. So if you're not from a Christian background, maybe you've never heard much about this, but there are miraculous healings recorded in Scripture. And Scripture does indicate in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and Ephesians chapter 4 that kind of miraculous ability had a purpose and a time frame in which it would be a thing, but that time would pass away. And so a lot of Christians believe that, that time is over. All right? Now, this person obviously didn't believe that, and they were going on and on about all of the times that they had miraculously healed people. And my friend, who was sitting on the plane next to this guy, listened politely and made one or two comments, just indicating that I'm not sure if I'm totally with you on all this, but go ahead and share. And then at the end of the flight, the time for turning your cell phones back on had come, and so this guy turns his cell phone on and gets a message, that is the person who believes he has the miraculous gift of healing. He gets a message that his son was working in the yard and severely cut himself. And he said, wow, I've got to get off this plane, and I've got to get out of here so I can take my son to the hospital. And my friend Steve, who was on the plane, said, why? Okay, that's all he said. He said, why? Here's someone who has been sharing for the last 2 hours that they believe they have the miraculous ability to heal people, but when their own child is injured, they're going to take them right to the hospital. Now, some of you may be familiar with this story if you've read Preacher's Help, and I would encourage you to do that. But anyway, This illustrates nicely the value of asking a question. Okay? So be willing to ask a question. Say, well, why do you think that? What statistics, what data, what reality, what truths can you share that back up your opinion? And if you don't have any, maybe you should say, well, this is just my opinion and back off a little, right? Number two, ask for time. All right? It's not wrong to say, hey, I disagree with you. I really don't think this is right, but I can't elaborate fully on exactly why. Give me some time and I'll come back and we can talk about this again. Okay? One, it takes a lot of humility to do that and a lot of honesty, and those are good characteristics to develop anyway, right? That may, in the short term, make you look bad, but in the long term, it's much more beneficial to say to someone when they disagree with you. I don't know if you've ever heard someone say, maybe they'll say, look, that whole Jesus stuff, there's no good evidence that Jesus ever lived. Well, maybe you don't have this encyclopedia in your brain that you can just list off all of this historical evidence. But you could say to that person, yeah, I don't think that's legit. Let me do a little bit of research and I'll come back, because I know there are lots of good historical reasons to believe that Jesus existed. Right? And so that's being humble enough to say, okay, I disagree with you, but give me some time. That's one of the ways we can engage in a conversation that's a little more helpful. Okay, what we often like to do in that situation is either make something up or call names, or we betray our own ignorance even further by taking that course of action, which seems to be so popular these days. Share a story. Okay, tell a story that will illustrate that there are some problems with the course of action that this individual is thinking about engaging in. All right, if you remember when the King David had to be told about his sin with Bathsheba and Uriah the Hittite, the prophet Nathan comes to him and says, let me tell you a story about a man and his sheep. Right? He doesn't go right to the issue. And so telling a story might be really, really helpful. It might be a good way for you to get someone to think about something that really maybe they need to think about. Okay, another great way to sort of speak up and say something is to share a video or a document, a book, right? Someone says something and they're totally, committed to it. You may respond, rather than immediately, saying, whoa, I disagree with you. Maybe you say, have you watched this video, or have you read this book, or have you read this article? Because the author there doesn't really agree with you, and let me share it with you, and we can after you've read it, we can dialogue more about this, right? By the way, we live in a time where it's easier than it's ever been to share that kind of stuff. You can share a YouTube video with somebody, you can share a document with them, or a whole website that can be helpful along these lines. I want to finish by giving you a couple of quotes. One is from Edmund Burke, and you're probably familiar with it. Edmund Burke said, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Okay, and we live in a society in which there's a lot of evil. In fact, you could say evil has become fairly predominant in our culture. And part of that is because those who know better have not said anything. Okay, we've allowed things to get to this point. Number two, and more importantly, there's a quote from the book of James. James says the tongue is a powerful tool. He compares it to the rudder of a ship. And he says, the rudder of a ship is a fairly small thing, but it can control the course of this whole giant ship. Well, here's what I'd like to challenge everyone watching to do. Use your tongue as a tool to change. I know it's small, and I know you may feel small in the face of some of the social issues and moral issues that are predominating our culture. But if James is right, and such a small item can have a big consequence, maybe we should use that tool of our tongues to try and enact some change and to turn society. You're not going to, God says the whole world's in the power of the evil one. So I'm not suspecting that you're going to see the whole world turn to God. Okay, that the Bible doesn't say that we should expect that. But you may see one life, or you may see one workplace or one home turn into a better direction. All because you had the courage to speak up. to say something when maybe no one else would, to not fear the backlash and the intimidation that your words could bring your way. Okay, so I want to leave you finally with a prayer from the Psalms. And the prayer says this: "Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O God, my strength and my Redeemer." That's the view from the pew.